Welcome back to our deep dive into the Quran. Today, we're exploring chapter 22, Al-Hajj, the pilgrimage.
Right. And it's quite something, this chapter, 78 verses. Commentators mention it was revealed, well, all over the place. Night, day, journeys, at home, war, peace. A real mix.
It is. It jumps between these grand, almost cosmic themes and then very specific guidance for the early Muslim community.
Exactly. You have the end times, divine judgment, but also the practicalities of the Hajj, the pilgrimage itself, which gives the chapter its name from verse 27.
And it touches on really central ideas, God's power, creation, what happens to believers and disbelievers.
And also some key historical moments for the community, like getting permission to defend themselves and how they related to other groups.
So our goal today, as always, is to unpack all of that. We'll go through the chapter, drawing on scholarly commentaries, aiming for a clear, objective look at everything it covers.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so it starts with a bang, doesn't it? Verse 1 talks about the hour and this massive quaking. How dramatic is this opening?
Oh, extremely. The commentaries really emphasize this. The quaking of the hour in verse 1 is described as just this tremendous, terrifying event.
So terrifying that verse 2 says, a nursing mother forgets her baby, a pregnant woman miscarries. People look drunk, but just from terror.
Right. And there's a bit of discussion among scholars. Is this describing the lead up to the end, the actual destruction, or the day of judgment itself? Either way, it's incredibly stark.
And straight after this huge warning, verse 3 turns to those who dispute concerning God without knowledge. And it brings in this idea of Satan.
Yes, those who follow every defiant Satan, as verse 3 puts it. Now, Satan here, commentators suggest, could mean the actual forces of Satan, or maybe jinn, or even human adversaries.
The word itself, shaitan, might come from gizez, or Aramaic, meaning adversary.
That's a possibility, yeah. And verse 4 says, for anyone who takes Satan as a guide, well, it's decree he'll lead them astray towards punishment.
Which brings up that accountability question again, doesn't it? If there's this external influence pushing you astray.
Where does personal responsibility come in? It's a core tension. The Quran seems clear that ultimately the choice to follow that misguidance is still yours.
Okay, so from that, the chapter pivots. Verses 5 to 7 move to resurrection, offering proofs. How does it argue for this?
It uses these really powerful signs from creation. Verse 5, which is quite a long verse compared to the ones around it, it details human creation.
Right, from dust, then the stages, the drop, the blood clot, the lump of flesh, growing to maturity, old age, death.
Exactly. It echoes some biblical accounts of that creation from dust idea, but then it does something really common in the Quran. It points to the earth.
How rain revives dry, dead.
Precisely. That image of the parched earth greening up after rain is used again and again as a symbol, a direct analogy for the resurrection of the dead.
So the logic is, if God can do that...
Right. Verse 6 says, God is the truth. He gives life to the dead. He's powerful over all things. And therefore, verse 7 concludes, the hour is coming, no doubt. It's like saying, look, he created you from practically nothing the first time. He revives the earth every year. Why wouldn't he be able to resurrect you? It's an argument from the greater to the lesser, in a way.
But even with these signs, verses 8 to 13 talk about people who still disbelieve. What's the focus here?
It's describing a specific kind of disbelief in verses 8 to 10. Those who argue without knowledge, without guidance, without an illuminating book, as verse 8 says.
And their attitude?
Pride, haughtiness. Verse 9 mentions them turning aside in arrogance, and the consequence is disgrace in this life and the punishment of the burning later.
Verse 10 really drives home the accountability part. God wrongs not his servants. Their punishment is because of their own actions, what your hands have sent forth.
Exactly. It's a deliberate choice to reject the signs out of pride.
Then verse 11 introduces this really interesting image, people who worship God upon a brink. What's that mean, being on the brink?
It suggests a very shallow, precarious faith. Not really rooted. Commentaries give examples, like maybe some Bedouins who embraced Islam expecting benefits.
And then when things got tough, they just abandoned it.
Exactly. If good things happened, they were content. But if a trial hit them, they turned away. Verse 11 calls this manifest loss, losing out both in this world and the next. It's about opportunistic faith versus real conviction.
It makes you think about how relevant that is even now, doesn't it? When belief might be tied to wanting certain outcomes.
It definitely does. It's a timeless warning about the quality and depth of faith.
And this shaky faith is contrasted with worshiping idols in verses 12 and 13. How's their powerlessness shown?
Very directly. Verse 12 says these idols neither harm him nor benefit him. And verse 13 adds their potential harm by leading you away from God is actually likelier than their benefit.
So worshiping them is inherently damaging, a manifest error.
Precisely. Because they fundamentally lack any real power.
Okay, so this leads naturally into verses 14 through 24, which lay out the contrasting destinies. Believers versus unbelievers. What stands out?
Well, for believers, you get the promise of gardens with rivers running below. That's in verse 14, and again in verse 23. It's that classic Quranic image of paradise.
Often seen as an oasis image, fitting the Arabian context maybe more than the biblical garden idea.
Right. Commentators point that out. Verse 15 is a bit tricky, though. Scholars note it seems a bit disconnected and have different takes on what the help mentioned there refers to.
But then verse 17 does something quite unique. It lists several different religious groups together.
Yes, that's quite striking. Verse 17 names those who believe: Jews, Sabians, Christians, Magians, and idolaters. 6 groups.
And Magians and Zoroastrians, right? Only mentioned here in the whole Quran.
Correct. It's a hapax legomenon, a word appearing only once. And the Sabians, well, their exact identity has been debated by scholars for a long time.
But the main point of the verse
Is that God will judge between them on the day of resurrection. It places the final judgment on these religious differences firmly in God's hands, not for humans to decide in this life.
That's a significant statement on religious plurality, implicitly.
It is. Then verse 18 paints this picture of universal worship, everything prostrating to God. Sun, moon, stars, mountains, trees, animals, many humans.
A cosmic praise. But not everyone joins in.
No. And for those who disbelieve, verses 19 to 22 switch to these incredibly vivid descriptions of punishment.
Like garments of fire, boiling liquid melting insides and skin, hooked iron rods. Very graphic.
Extremely. Some commentaries try to find spiritual meanings too, like the soul being beaten down by false ideas, but the imagery is undeniably intense.
And the contrast couldn't be sharper with verses 23 and 24 describing believers in paradise.
Exactly. Adorned with bracelets of gold and pearl, wearing silk, guided to good speech and the path of God, the praised. It's total opposites, fire and agony versus bliss and honor.
Now we arrive at the core theme, the pilgrimage itself, in verses 25 to 37. How is the Kaaba, the sacred mosque, introduced here?
Verse 25 mentions the sacred mosque al-Masjid al-Haram, typically understood as the Kaaba precinct, and it immediately condemns anyone who would block access to it.
Tradition often links this verse to the time the Prophet Muhammad and his followers were prevented from making the pilgrimage to Mecca, right? Around 628 CE.
Yes, that's a common historical connection made in the commentaries. The Kaaba is also called the Ancient House in verse 29, suggesting its long history and resilience.
And Abraham's role is absolutely central here. What does it say he was commanded to do?
Verses 26 to 29 really focus on him. God tells him, verse 27, to proclaim the Hajj among mankind. People will come from everywhere, on foot and upon all manner of lean beast, coming from all deep and distant mountain highways.
A universal call. And what about the specific rites mentioned?
Things like circumambulation, walking around the Kaaba, standing like at Arafat, bowing, prostrating in prayer, mentioning God's name, and importantly, animal sacrifice.
Verse 29 also mentions finishing their untidiness. Tafath. What's that about?
That refers to ending the state of Ihram, the special ritual state pilgrims enter. It involves things like cutting hair or nails, which are restricted during Ihram. Finishing these acts marks the completion of certain rites.
Okay, and the term enif comes up in verse 31, linked to Abraham. We've touched on this before, but what's its significance here?
Enif is crucial. It describes someone, like Abraham, who is naturally inclined towards pure monotheism. It's interesting because the Syriac root word anha actually meant pagan.
But the Quran reclaims it.
Completely. It redefines anif to mean a true primordial monotheist, rejecting idols, someone who isn't specifically Jewish or Christian but follows the original faith of Abraham.
And this connects to magnifying the sacred things of God in verse 30
Yeah.
and the rituals of God, Shay, in verse 32.
Yes, it's about reverence. Verse 32 explicitly says magnifying these rituals comes from the reverence of the hearts. It's not just going through the motions. Commentaries link this even to the quality of the sacrificial animals. Choosing good ones shows inner piety.
Which leads perfectly to the meaning of the sacrifice itself in verses 36 and 37. What's the core message about the meat and blood?
This is really profound. Verse 37 states it very clearly. Neither their flesh nor their blood will reach God. but the reverence from you reaches him.
So it's not about feeding God or even automatically washing away sins through the act itself.
No. The emphasis is entirely on the inner state of the believer, the piety, the sincerity, the God consciousness, taqwa, behind the act. That's what reaches God.
It echoes critiques of empty ritual you find elsewhere, even in the Bible, right?
Right.
Prophets saying God desires mercy, not just sacrifice.
Absolutely. It's a very similar spiritual principle. The inner disposition matters far more than the outward form.
Okay, moving on. Verses 38 to 41 introduce a really significant development. Permission to fight. What's the context?
This is widely seen as a major turning point. Verse 39 gives believers permission to fight because they have been wronged.
This comes after years of persecution in Mecca and the emigration to Medina.
Exactly. After a period of enduring hardship and leaving their homes, commentaries suggest Muslims might have wanted to retaliate earlier, perhaps secretly.
But verse 38 says God doesn't love any ungrateful traitor, implying open, sanctioned defense is preferred.
That's the interpretation, yes. Permission was granted for open, defensive struggle.
And verse 40 gives this really broad justification, mentioning other places of worship. What's the significance of that?
It's remarkable. It says if God didn't allow people to defend themselves against others, then monasteries, churches, synagogues, and mosques, wherein God's name is mentioned much, would have been destroyed.
So the permission isn't just about protecting Muslims or mosques.
It seems broader. The rationale given is the protection of all legitimate places where God is worshipped. It frames the struggle as defending the very principle of worshiping God freely.
That adds a whole different layer to the concept of defensive fighting here.
It really does. It links it to a wider preservation of religious practice.
Then verses 42 to 44 seem to offer comfort and context to the Prophet Muhammad. How?
By reminding him he's not alone in facing rejection. It lists previous messengers, Noah, Ad, Thamud, Abraham, Lot, the people of Midian, Moses, who were all denied by their people.
So it's a way of saying, look, this is the pattern. Prophets face opposition, but God's plan unfolds.
Exactly. It validates his experience and offers historical precedent. It leads into verses 45 and 46, which point to the ruins of cities destroyed for their wrongdoing, urging reflection.
And verse 46 makes that point about blindness. It's not the eyes that are blind, but the hearts within the breasts.
A powerful metaphor for spiritual blindness.
And then verse 47, that famous line, a day with your Lord is as 1,000 years of what you count. What do commentators make of that?
Well, there are various ideas. Is it about the scale of creation, the length of Judgment Day, or just how differently God perceives time compared to us, maybe how long punishment feels?
Whatever the specifics, it emphasizes God's perspective is vastly different, beyond our human timescale.
Right, and it underlines his ultimate control. Then verse 49 brings it back to the prophet's specific role. I am only a clear warner.
Setting up the clear distinction again between the fates of believers and disbelievers in verses 50 and 51. Okay, now we reach a section, verses 52 to 54, that's probably generated more discussion and controversy than any other in this chapter.
Yeah.
The so-called satanic verses incident. What does the text actually say here?
Verse 52 is interesting because it's sort of meta. It talks about revelation. It says that whenever God sent a messenger or prophet before Muhammad, when they recited or had a longing, amniya, Satan would sometimes cast something into that recitation or longing.
And this is where the story of the cranes comes in, the Qati al-Quranic.
Yes, that's the traditional narrative associated with this verse, particularly in Western scholarship, since William Muir popularized it. The story goes that Satan briefly interpolated praise for pre-Islamic goddesses Allat, Al-Uzza, and Manat into the prophet's recitation.
Suggesting they could intercede with God, like high-flying cranes.
Something like that, yes. And the story continues that God then revealed verses to correct this, effacing Yansaku, what Satan had cast.
But how historically reliable is this story according to Islamic scholarship?
Well, while some very early sources do mention versions of it, the majority of later Muslim commentators and most modern scholars are highly skeptical, often rejecting it outright.
Why? What are the main objections?
Several reasons. One, the chains of transmission for the story are often weak or broken. Two, the accounts themselves have inconsistencies. Three, psychologically, it seems implausible for a prophet whose entire mission was against idolatry.
And theologically.
That's perhaps the biggest issue. The doctrine of Ima, the divine protection of prophets from major sin and error, makes it difficult, if not impossible, for many scholars to accept that Satan could directly interfere with the revealed text through the prophet.
So if the cranes story isn't the necessary explanation for verse 52, What does the verse likely mean?
It's generally understood to refer to the human struggles even prophets face, perhaps doubts, desires, or external pressures that Satan might try to exploit. But crucially, God always intervenes to make firm his signs, to purify the message, and ensure its integrity. It affirms God's ultimate control over revelation, protecting it from corruption.
And verse 53 says, what Satan casts becomes a trial or a fitna.
Yes, a trial for those with disease in their hearts, meaning hypocrites, doubters. It causes them to fall into extreme schism. But for those with knowledge, verse 54 says, it actually strengthens their faith, helping them recognize the truth and submit.
So it acts as a sort of test, revealing people's inner states.
Exactly.
Okay, after that complex passage, the chapter shifts back to emphasizing God's majesty and power. What examples does it use?
It really zooms out to the cosmos and nature. Verse 56 states, sovereignty that day shall be God's. Verse 58 calls him the best of providers. Then you get these rhetorical questions starting, have you not seen or do you not consider? Alum Terra.
Like in verses 63 and 65.
Right. Verse 63 asks you to consider how God merges night and day, how he sends rain to make the earth green. Verse 65 points to ships sailing by his command and how he holds the sky up.
All signs of his power and care.
Precisely. It highlights attributes like God being subtle, aware, 63, self-sufficient, praised, and kind and merciful unto mankind, verse 65. The point is that creation itself testifies to him, and much of it is made subservient for human benefit.
Then in verses 67 to 71, there's advice on dealing with disputes, particularly with other religious communities. What's the approach?
It advocates a kind of principled disengagement from fruitless arguments. Verse 67 says, for every community we have appointed a right, so let them not argue with thee over the matter.
Acknowledging diversity in practice.
Yes. And if they do argue, verses 68 and 69 advise saying, essentially, God knows best what you do, and God will judge between you on Resurrection Day about your differences.
So stand firm in your truth, but leave the ultimate judgment to God.
That seems to be the message. Avoid getting bogged down in polemics. Verse 71 reinforces this by pointing out that those who worship others besides God do so without any authority, Selin, which can mean revealed proof or rational demonstration.
And that leads into another powerful image, the parable of the fly in verse 73. Why a fly?
It's such a brilliant example of powerlessness. The verse says, look, all these beings you worship instead of God, they could never create even a single fly, even if they all teamed up to try.
And worse, if a fly stole something tiny from them, they couldn't even get it back.
Exactly. Feebles are the seeker and the sought. It's an argument from the small to the large, a minor ad meus. If they're helpless against a fly, how could they possibly have created the universe or have any real power?
It dramatically shows they haven't grasped God's true measure, as verse 74 says.
Right. They did not measure God with his true measure. The parable exposes the sheer absurdity of idolatry.
Finally, the chapter closes with direct commands to believers in verses 77 and 78. What's the final message?
It's a powerful summary and call to action. Verse 77 says, O you who believe, bow, prostrate, and worship your Lord, and do good, that haply you may prosper.
Covering both ritual worship and ethical conduct.
Both. And then verse 78 contains that key phrase, strive for God as he should be striven for, Jahi filahi haka jihadihi.
Using the root word for jihad, what does strive mean here?
Commentaries stress it's primarily about exerting comprehensive effort in God's way. It includes inner struggle against wrong, striving to follow God's commands, performing duties, and doing it all sincerely for God, not for worldly gain. It's much broader than just fighting.
And the verse reassures them, he has placed no hardship for you in the religion.
Yes, emphasizing ease. It also connects them back to Abraham, the creed of your father Abraham, calling them Muslims, submitters, long before Islam as a specific religion, chosen to be witnesses for humanity.
With the Prophet Muhammad as a witness over them.
Exactly. And the final command ties it all together. Keep up prayer, give charity, and hold fast to God. He is the ultimate master and helper. It's a call to complete reliance and commitment.
Wow. What a journey through Al-Hajj. From that earth-shattering start about the hour, through the rites of pilgrimage, the permission to defend, the critiques of disbelief, the parables. It really covers so much ground.
It really does. You see warnings and promises, history lessons, very specific legal rulings, and these profound spiritual insights all woven together.
And that recurring theme, that what truly matters is the inner state, the reverence from you that reaches God, not just the outward act, whether it's sacrifice or prayer or striving.
Absolutely. That emphasis on taqwa, on sincere intention and God consciousness, runs through the whole chapter. It constantly calls you to reflect on God's power, your purpose, and the need for genuine faith.
So as we wrap up, here's something to think about. If this chapter keeps stressing that true devotion is about that inner reverence of hearts, beyond any physical act or ritual performance, how does that challenge us today? How do we ensure our own commitments, whatever they are, religious or otherwise, genuinely come from that deep place of sincerity?
That's a really vital question to carry away. How do we cultivate that inner reality?
Definitely something to ponder. Join us next time for another deep dive.